Zechariah 5 and verse number 1. Then I turned and lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a flying roll. And he said unto me, What seest thou? And I answered, I see a flying roll. The length thereof is 20 cubits, and the breadth thereof 10 cubits. Then said he unto me, This is the curse that goeth forth over the face of the whole earth. For everyone that stealeth shall be cut off as on this side according to it. And everyone that sweareth shall be cut off as on that side according to it. Excuse me, I'll probably do that a lot tonight. I will bring it forth, saith the Lord of hosts, and it shall enter into the house of the thief, and into the house of him that sweareth falsely by my name. And it shall remain in the midst of his house, and shall consume it with the timber thereof and the stones thereof. Then the angel that talked with me went forth and said unto me, Lift up now thine eyes, and see what is this that goeth forth. And I said, What is it? And he said, This is an ephah that goeth forth. He said, Moreover, this is their resemblance through all the earth. And behold, there was lifted up a talent of lead, and this is a woman that sitteth in the midst of the ephah. And he said, This is wickedness. And he cast it into the midst of the ephah, and he cast the weight of lead upon the mouth thereof. Then lifted I up mine eyes, and looked, and behold, there came out two women, and the wind was in their wings. For they had wings like the wings of a stork. And they lifted up the ephah between the earth and the heaven. Then said I to the angel that talked with me, Whither do these bear the ephah? And he said unto me, To build it an house in the land of Shinar, and it should be established and set there upon her own base. In Zechariah chapter 5, there's two visions. Basically, there's a flying scroll, and there's a woman in a basket. And we have two women that have wings like the wings of a stork, and they pick up that basket and they fly away with it. And Zechariah wonders where they go. So there's 8 visions in one night. This is number 6 and number 7. And I find it very interesting to study passages like this and try to discover what the meaning is behind them. And sometimes when you study the Bible, you've got clear understanding. Sometimes you have partial understanding. Sometimes you're stumped. You have no idea. And I think in this chapter we'll be all three. I think the chapter falls somewhere in the middle. I believe that we can interpret it, but it's not all as clear to me as John chapter 3. But even still, it's wonderful to me how the Bible is a great commentary on the Bible. When you take obscure passages and how they fit into the message of the entire book, and hopefully you'll see that by the end of the night. Now, the book of Zechariah is so rich because it is so vast in prophecy. I've preached prophecy a number of times here at the church, preached through the book of Revelation, preached through Daniel, preached prophecy series. I love preaching on prophecy. And as you go through prophecy, you're able to look at different parts or different aspects of end-time events. We have seen already in the book of Zechariah the restoration of Israel, judgment upon nations, the spiritual cleansing of Israel, the rise and fall of world empires. We've seen all of those things, and it's all in the book of Zechariah. From the first coming to the second coming, it's all right here in this book. But in Zechariah chapter number 5, there is another aspect of the end times that has not been touched upon, and this time it is the judgment of God upon sin and upon sinners. Because you know, sometimes as you go through life, it looks like that sin goes unpunished, that wicked men prosper. Sometimes godly men despair. God, why don't you do something about all the wickedness that surely you see? Do you know how easy it would be for God to round up all the abortion doctors in America and just zap them? Then why doesn't he? I mean, you know how easy it would be for God to get all the crooks and the adulterers and the child molesters and the sex offenders and just get them all in one group and just drop them all into hell? It'd make for a better place to live, wouldn't it? Then why doesn't he? And I believe we're going to find the answer to that question in Zechariah chapter 5, and this woman and this basket and these women with these wings like stork wings. Now, I want to build a theology for you, a theology on sin, and so stay with me, and we'll come back to Zechariah chapter 5 in just a minute. But let me begin by saying this, and I think that this will be an amen point for you. God is a holy God, and He has a zero tolerance for sin. You agree with that? God never winks at sin. God never says, oh, that's not a big deal. He's never okay with covering it up and just letting it go. Right? A multitude of verses. I'll give you a couple. Psalm 5 and verse 4. For thou art not a God that hath pleasure in wickedness, neither shall evil dwell with thee. The foolish shall not stand in thy sight. Thou hatest all workers of iniquity. Psalm chapter 11. The Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked, and him that loveth violence, his soul hateth. Upon the wicked he shall rain snares, fire and brimstone, and an horrible tempest. This shall be the portion of their cup. So God is a holy God. He has a zero tolerance for sin. However, sometimes it doesn't seem that way. Sometimes it seems like that God just turns His head and just lets things go. I mean, sometimes it seems like that the wicked prevail and the righteous suffer, and sometimes it seems that the wicked sin with impunity and God doesn't do anything about it. Psalm 10. David, why standest thou far off, O Lord? Why hidest thou thyself in times of trouble? The wicked in his pride doth persecute the poor. Let them be taken in the devices that they've imagined. For the wicked boasteth of his heart's desire, and blesseth the covetous whom the Lord abhorreth. Does that not sound like a contradiction right there? Asaph, Psalm 73. I was envious at the foolish when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. For there are no bands in their death, but their strength is firm. They are not in trouble as other men, neither are they plagued like other men. Boy, here's a strong one from Jeremiah. Jeremiah 12. Now you listen to these words of the prophet. He says, righteous art thou, O Lord, when I plead with thee. Yet let me talk with thee of thy judgments. Wherefore doth the way of the wicked prosper? Wherefore are all they happy that deal very treacherously? So I say to you tonight that God's a holy God. He has a zero tolerance for sin, but sometimes it doesn't seem that way. Sometimes it seems like that sin does not go punished. And David and Asaph and Jeremiah, they all have the same question. My theology says you hate sin. My experience in life says that it's no big deal to you. Because there's a lot of sin and a lot of wrong and a lot of injustice that seems to just get by. And that question has been asked by nearly every Christian who has ever lived. Why do you allow sin to flourish and righteousness not to flourish in the land? Now here's the answer tonight. God will punish sin. He will. He's not blind to it. He's not deaf to it. He's not turning his head. He's not silent. He's not absent-minded. He's not... No, God will punish sin. Psalm 50 and verse 3, our God shall come and shall not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him, and he shall be very tempestuous round about him. Psalm 97 and verse 1, the Lord reigneth, let the earth rejoice. Let the multitude of isles be glad thereof. Clouds and darkness around about him. Righteousness and judgment are the habitation of his throne. A fire goeth before him, and burneth up his enemies round about. To those who believe that God's not doing anything about sin, just wait till Jesus gets back. And when he comes back, he's coming back in fire and lightning, and the earth is going to tremble. And when Jesus comes, he's going to judge sin and sinners in a terrible way. So God's a holy God, zero tolerance for sin. Sometimes it doesn't seem that way, but just hold on. When he comes back, when God comes back, he is going to punish sin. You said, and when's this going to happen? It'll happen in the kingdom. Matthew chapter 24, the Bible says that God is going to judge the nations, I believe that America will not go unrewarded. I tell you, America's got a lot of innocent blood to answer for. 1.5 million babies aborted every year in this country. You think God's forgotten about that? I'm going to tell you, when God comes back and God rewards and God judges the nations, I'm going to tell you, America is included in that. He's going to establish His reign, and the Bible says He's going to reign with a rod of iron. And at the end of His righteous reign, there's going to be a great white throne judgment, and that's going to be the final judgment on sin. So at the beginning and during and at the ending, there's going to be judgment on sin. Now, it's a brief theology of how God's going to judge sin. I believe that that's what Zechariah chapter 5 is all about. You see, all of these visions have been to the remnant. They've been to the faithful. And these visions have been to encourage them that God is going to keep His promises and God's going to restore Israel and all these wonderful things He's going to do. But then the question comes up, what about the unfaithful? Well, what about the Jews that don't come back? What about the ones that didn't return, that stayed in Babylon, that don't believe God? What about those who are outward Jews but they're not inward Jews? Because even in that day there were some Jews that didn't make the trek back, and they didn't worship God, and they stayed in that Babylonian culture and that pagan lifestyle, and they didn't want to change. So the question is, as God rewards the faithful, what about the unfaithful? What's God going to do there? And Zechariah chapter 5 answers that question. So let's walk through the chapter, all right? Let's see if we can see it. Look, if you would, in verse number 1. Then I turned and lifted up mine eyes, and looked, and behold, a flying roll. He said unto me, what seest thou? And I answered, I see a flying roll. The length thereof is 20 cubits, and the breadth thereof 10 cubits. Now, when I think flying roll, I think Lambert's. I think a roll, I think a biscuit, all right? That's not what this is talking about. I'm talking about a roll that's talking about a scroll, all right? A scroll is a long piece of paper that would be wound up on 2 sticks, and as you unwind the sticks, and it would unwind that, and you could read that. So that's what it's talking about a scroll. Now, the scroll is a big one. It's 20 cubits long, and it's 10 cubits wide. I won't go into all of this. A cubit was 18 inches. So if you break this down, this roll is 30 by 15 feet. That's a big roll. Bigger than my office at home. So just think a big sized room, all right? So it's a huge scroll. There's writing on both sides of it. You'll see that in verse 3. And it's flying. That's in verse number 1. Got a roll. It's real big. Writing on both sides. And it's flying. Now, I don't believe there's any insignificant details in the Bible, even if you don't know what those details are about. But I believe everything's there for a reason. Now, if you start digging, you'll find out that the measurements of that roll is the exact same measurements of the holy place in the tabernacle. The tabernacle had the outer court, had the holy place, had the Holy of Holies. The holy place was 30 by 15. The Holy of Holies was a perfect cube of 15 by 15 by 15. So it's telling me the scroll is not, it doesn't just happen to be big, it's that big by divine standards. This is a divine measurement, and whatever is on the scroll must conform to a divine standard. Now look at verse number 3. Then saith he unto me, this is the curse that goeth forth over the face of the whole earth. For everyone that stealeth shall be cut off as on this side according to it. Everyone that sweareth shall be cut off as on that side according to it. I will bring it forth, saith the Lord of hosts, and it shall enter into the house of the thief and into the house of him that sweareth falsely by my name, and it shall remain in the midst of his house, and shall consume it with the timber thereof and the stones thereof. So here's what it says. This scroll, it contains a curse. And the curse is God's judgment that's going to come over all of the earth. If you hold your finger here, I'll give you a cross reference. Ezekiel chapter 2. Ezekiel chapter 2, go to it if you would. And stay with me tonight. We're just going to walk our way through the text and just study the Bible. So Ezekiel chapter 2 and verse number 9. And when I looked, behold, an hand was sent unto me, and lo, a roll of a book was therein. And he spread it before me. It was written within and without. And there was written therein lamentations and mourning and woe. So it's given us a clue that this scroll represents doom. By the way, back in Zechariah chapter 5, you could even say that it represents sudden doom because it's flying. It's going to be universal doom because the Bible says it goes over all the face of the whole earth. And it's going to come from God because it's flying in the heavens. I believe there's another cross reference. If you want to write it down, I believe that you could give another cross reference to this in Revelation chapter 5. In Revelation chapter 5, there is another book, and there's nobody found worthy to open the book. Do you remember that? And then they gave the book to the Lamb of God, and he was worthy to open the book. And by the way, when he opens that book, the next chapter, chapter 6, brings a lot of tribulation, a lot of doom, a lot of woe, a lot of judgment. When Christ takes the scroll from the Father in Revelation chapter 5 and he begins to unroll it, it unleashes judgment upon all the earth, just like in Zechariah chapter 5. And so this scroll, it may speak of a particular judgment. It could speak of judgment as a whole that's coming in the end times. There's going to be the judgment of the tribulation period. We know there's going to be the judgment of the nations. We know there's going to be the great white throne judgment. And so judgment is coming, and that's what that scroll is saying. Christ is going to rule with a rod of iron. If you'll notice something else in verse number 3, if you'll notice that the scroll is written on both sides. It says, as on this side according to it, and then as on that side according to it. Hold your finger right here. Let me show you a parallel. Exodus chapter 32. Exodus chapter 32. Exodus 32, Moses coming down from the mountain with tablets of stone. Exodus 32, verse 15, Moses turned and went down from the mount, and the two tables of the testimony were in his hand. The tables were written on both their sides. On the one side and on the other were they written. So I believe there's a parallel between this scroll that Zechariah sees and that law of Moses. I believe it's pointing to this scroll as a scroll of judgment, and the judgment is going to be according to divine law. God's going to judge according to the law that is written. Same measurement, same dimensions as the holy place, same measurements, same standards. By the way, the holy place, that's the most holy place in Israel. It brings you to holiness is what it does. And so the judgment's going to come not by public opinion, not by a church creed. It's going to come by the standard of divine holiness. Something else you may want to notice back in Zechariah chapter 5, there's two commands given specifically. For everyone that stealeth shall be cut off, and everyone that sweareth shall be cut off. Now, why is it those two commands given? And I don't believe the judgment is just for people that do those two things, but those are representative. But why those two things? Well, it's interesting to me, if you go back to the Ten Commandments, written on two tablets of stone, 5 on one side, 5 on the other side. The third commandment is taking God's name in vain, swearing falsely. The 8th commandment is thou shalt not steal. So if you look at that tablet written on both sides, the middle commandment on one side would be the swearing falsely. The middle commandment on the other side would be the stealing. And it's interesting to me that these two are mentioned, and so I think it's just God's way of saying that the scroll encompasses all of God's law, and the middle ones represents the whole law. So what Zechariah sees is he sees a scroll, and it has judgment, and the judgment is upon the sinner. It says upon everyone that sinneth, everyone that sweareth, and everyone that stealeth. That ultimate judgment is going to come when Christ comes back. He's going to judge the sinner. He's going to judge the world. So it's a scroll of judgment. Look at verse number 5. Then the angel that talked with me went forth and said unto me, Lift up now thine eyes, and see what is this that goeth forth. And I said, What is it? He said, This is an ephah that goeth forth. He said, Moreover, this is their resemblance through all the earth. So now he sees a different vision. Here we have this flying scroll. We've talked about it. Now the angel is going to show him something else. Now he's going to see an ephah. Now, an ephah in the Bible is a measurement, and it's used mostly for grain. To be exact, an ephah would be equal to a barrel or 8 gallons, or I think 38 quarts. It's about a barrel is what it is, all right? And it's the largest measurement that Israel had was the ephah. So an ephah is essentially a barrel of something, a barrel of wheat or a barrel of grain, a barrel of some kind of commodity. Verse number 8 gives you a hint as to what it is. He said, this is wickedness. So the ephah is not filled with grain, it's filled with sin. And God's going to judge Israel for her sins. And here's what he does. He uses the largest measurement to say they are full of sin. It spoke of the present condition of Israel, but it's going to speak ultimately when Jesus comes back. And basically what it's saying is that you're not sinning by the quart. You're sinning by the barrel, by the ephah. An ephah that's full of wickedness. Well, look at verse number 7. Behold, there was lifted up a talent of lead, and this is a woman that sitteth in the midst of the ephah. And he said, this is wickedness. He cast it into the midst of the ephah, and he cast the weight of lead upon the mouth. Boy, it just keeps getting stranger and stranger and weirder, doesn't it? Now there's a woman sitting in the ephah. This barrel of whatever it is, there's a woman sitting in it, and there's a lead talent. And it looks like to me from verse 7 and 8, I don't know, but it looks like to me that talent, that lead talent, is kind of like a lid. I mean, you open it up, you see that woman sitting there in that ephah. Well, that's really strange. Grain was often the symbol of commerce and trade. I believe that it speaks to the fact that when Christ returns, what he's going to find is a world of materialism and fatness. A world of godless gain, materialistic, selfish, self-centeredness. And if the final form of wickedness when God returns is an economic wickedness, then the world is sure ripe for that judgment. When God puts the lid on the final form of wickedness, it will be materialistic wickedness. And I keep looking for parallels and cross-references, and I think that Revelation 18 would be a good cross. Would you turn there? Revelation chapter 18, I believe this is a good parallel. Revelation 18 describes that one world government, that one world church, and the harlot church will be filthy rich, and she'll have committed fornications with the 10 kings of the earth. Look at Revelation chapter 8, and we'll just pick up a couple of verses. Look at verse number 7, Revelation 18, verse number 7. How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously. So much torment and sorrow give her, for she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Verse number 9, of the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her. Verse number 11, the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore, the merchandise of gold and silver, precious stone and purple and fine linen. And it goes through all of those things. Verse number 15, the merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing. Riches, but I tell you, all of it's going to come crashing down, because in verse number 17, for in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And I believe that that's what Zechariah sees in this basket. That basket is full, it's a tool of commerce and trade, and it's full of wickedness, and God is going to slam the lid down on it, and nothing is going to escape. Now, the most confusing thing to me, back in Zechariah chapter 5, is that woman. Who is she? And who does she represent? And the best that I can do with it is just to point out, and I don't know, but the best that I can do with that woman is to point out that the final form of apostate religion is represented by a woman. Revelation 18, the mother of harlots, or chapter 17, the mother of harlots, I believe is the Roman Catholic Church, represented by an evil woman. And so maybe the woman in the midst of, in the final form of wickedness is that harlot church, and she's going to be thrown into the baskets with the kings that she fornicated with, and God's going to judge both at the same time. I don't know. I don't know what else to do with that woman. But look at verse number 9. Then lifted I up mine eyes and looked, and behold, there came out 2 women, and the wind was in their wings. For they had wings like the wings of a stork, and they lifted up the ephah between the earth and the heaven. Then said I to the angel that talked with me, Whither do these bear the ephah? And he said unto me, To build it an house in the land of Shinar. It should be established and set there upon her own base. Boy, you're talking about strange. So first we have a flying roll, a book flying through the air. And then we have this barrel, this ephah, and a woman sitting in the barrel. Now what we have is we have 2 women, and they're flying, and they have wings like stork wings, and they come and they pick up that ephah, that barrel with that woman in it, and they fly off with it. That's what it says. And Zechariah wants to know where they're taking it. And the angel says they're taking it to Shinar. They're going to build a house for it in the land of Shinar. And again, I have no idea who those 2 women are. Some commentators say that they're demons, they're evil spirits, and I could go with that. I don't know. I do know that storks in the Bible are unclean. So there's an unclean connotation with this thing. They take this basket that I believe represents the final form of wickedness, materialism, and religious activity perhaps, and they take it to Shinar to make it as a base out of Shinar. By the way, you may be interested to know another name for Shinar. It's Babylon. Did you know that in Revelation 17 and 18, the one world government and the one world religion will be based out of Babylon? By the way, do you know where all false religions started? It started in Babel. Genesis chapter 11. You know where it's going to end? It's going to end in Babylon. Yeah. Babel was the first attempt at a unified government and a unified religion. First city built after the flood. It became the center of idolatry, founded by Nimrod. Became the fountainhead from which all false religions and idolatry came from. You can read the books by is it Alexander Heslop, The Two Babylons? I think it's a book. You can read the material there. And by the way, idolatry was a Gentile problem, but it became a Jewish problem. In fact, the reason why God sent them into captivity was to punish them for their idolatry. It was their idolatry that got them carried away. And do you know what the captivity did? It cured them of idolatry. And when they came back, and even in Jesus' day, they had a lot of faults. But idolatry was not one of them. But in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus gave a parable. We preached on it. And here's the parable. There's a man that had an evil spirit. The evil spirit leaves. And he comes back, and he finds this man empty, swept, and garnished. Comes back in, brings 7 other evil spirits with him. And his latter end is worse than his first. And I believe that that's a type. That is a warning to Israel. And the warning to Israel is that if they remain void and empty of the Holy Spirit, their final apostasy will be worse than all the previous apostasies. At the end of the age will be the final Jewish apostasy. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to go back to idolatry. The world is going to bow down before the Antichrist. They're going to worship him as God. The unclean spirit's going to return to Israel with 7 other spirits, and their end will be worse than before. And I believe that is the ephah of wickedness that Christ is going to find when he comes back. By the way, the first Tower of Babel, you know where it was built? It was built in the land of Shinar. Thousands of years later, another Nimrod, his name is Nebuchadnezzar. This time he wouldn't build a tower, he would build an image. And again, demand that people bow down and worship it. You know where he built it? He built it in the plain of Dura, which is in the land of Shinar. All idolatry, false religion is going to end up right back where it started. So here's the sum of the whole matter from Zechariah chapter 5. That when Jesus comes back, he's going to find the earth full of wickedness. It'll be full of materialism and greed and excess. And the final form of apostasy and one world government and one world religion will be in full force. And Christ is going to judge sin. He's going to judge the sinner. He's going to judge the world system and all the injustices and all the corruptions. I'm telling you, the iron fist of the King of Kings is going to come down hard on it. And for all of those who love righteousness, what a wonderful day that will be. You look around, it looks like that sin goes unpunished, that God is either powerless or he's blind to it, but God's keeping a record. And one day God will judge sin. I believe that's what the message of Zechariah chapter 5 is tonight. Now, if you do not believe that is the message of Zechariah 5, then I encourage you to study it and you find what you think the message of Zechariah chapter 5 is. I believe that that is the message. Dad mentioned this Sunday night when he preached. President Trump, last Wednesday, a week ago, announcing that we recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and begin making plans to move the embassy to Jerusalem. I want to tell you, I think it's a wonderful thing. I don't care what you think about Trump or anybody else. That's a good thing. And that blessed my heart. It really did. And I thought about writing, and I may write him a letter, say he'll never read the letter probably, but I appreciate you doing that. And we don't participate in newspaper exegesis. Simply pick up the paper and try to find every event in Bible prophecy, all right? So we don't do that. But I tell you, you read the newspaper, you'll despair. You read the Bible, you'll have some hope. And the hope is that Jesus comes back real soon and settles the score. And I can't wait for it.